Welcome to Fields of Consciousness, podcast for consciousness conversations. I'm Jeffrey.
And I'm Clayten.
As consciousness explorers and founders of Focus Life Force Energy, we're here to bring a holistic approach to consciousness and share practical examples of how you can take your life to the next level.
In this episode, we discuss work life and spirituality. We also talk about the principles around this relationship between spirituality and different parts of our life and how you can apply them anywhere that you want to. Enjoy the episode.
Thanks for joining us once again on Fields of Consciousness. This episode is on work life, business, and spirituality. You don't have to be a business person or in business for this to apply to you. Welcome.
These principles are universal. Any spiritual approach you decide to take to any part of your life, you can use the three principles or steps of evolution that we're going to talk about today and apply it to any aspect of your spiritual journey.
Yeah, people tend to think about business as being separate from their spirituality. And the way we're doing FLFE in our lives, Clayten, it's together. There's really no difference between business or work life and spiritual life. And that's how we run the business and in our lives, I'd say.
Yeah, it's a fundamental shift in your thinking when you consciously decide to not separate business from the rest of your life. And that's a big leap for a lot of us. And then, we have to find a way to make peace with what happens in the world in business and how that can be an opportunity for us to learn. So there's a few steps in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you've got a lot of years under your belt helping people with that subtle yet really important step.
Yeah, I got into the coaching business back in 1995, that's a long time ago. And I did my first training in life skills coaching, actually. And when I was deciding to go into the coaching business, I looked at my background, skills, and experience. I just spent 11 years being very active in Eastern-based philosophy, and that was the major focus of my life. And I worked in private education for most of those years, private schools, business schools. And I decided that business was where the power was in the world. So if you want to do the most amount of good with the least amount of effort, right? That's something we talk about a lot, Jeff. We call it the critical factor. Mm-hmm. And I decided that since business was, at least where I perceived the power was in the world at this time, in the past it's been in the church or it's perhaps been in the arts during the Renaissance period. And today it's in business and finance. So I decided to work with business people. And because I'd spent those 11 years in that Eastern-based philosophy, I decided that the relationship between business and spirituality is where I could do the most good with the energy that I had, time, energy, and other resources. So that was the beginning of a lot of conversations about business and spirituality, and I attracted people who were interested in that. So it was the great conversations to have.
Yeah, I was one of those people, and it makes so much sense to me that back then and now too. It's like that's where we spend most of our time and a lot of energy is working, whatever we're doing, whether we're working in as a cashier in a business or we're working in a manufacturing business or, even in a career of of educating children, or being taking care of kids in a family. It's, you could say, running a household, that's a business in itself, and a career. But particularly in those business situations where you're working and there's things happening, and there's those rubs that come up, right? Those, like, conflicts, or times when I've gotten triggered. And it's like in those moments is when I feel like I've made the most spiritual progress, because either later I go, wow, I really got triggered at that situation. What's going on for me, and how can I transcend that personally? And so for me, there's so many opportunities in work life for spiritual, evolution.
Yeah, for those of us who believe life is a school, or a consciousness, a consciousness school, perhaps is a better way to say it. You don't have to look too hard for lessons. They seem to be there's enough opportunities to learn that are presented pretty readily, and sometimes those opportunities to learn are just to have joy, right? Because sometimes we learn as much through joyful success and celebrating and being grateful for what we have. We learn just as much from that as we do from the tough spots. So it's easy to forget that, we tend to want to, struggle with stuff and talk about the hard times. It's like, well, yeah, they're there.
That's one of my favorite sayings. Suffering is optional.
Yes.
Doesn't always feel that way, but it's how we perceive each situation. And for me, looking at it as an opportunity, as a way to move myself forward, even if it's painful in the moment, helps to shift it out of suffering into an evolutionary opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of experience talking about this concept because we've been living it for 8 years together, and we have our own paths before that. But it doesn't, we're not perfect at it. We just have a lot of practice at it, and we have a culture now in the company we started that is very conscious about this being an evolutionary path, to being in this business. And we still have challenges, we still have problems, and and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. We need that evolutionary stimulus, as we call it.
Yeah.
So what makes a high consciousness business, Clayten, and from your point of view?
Well, one of the things would be a conscious awareness that that's what you're doing, that you are looking at your business life as part of your spiritual development, and that the opportunities that happen in business and the challenges that happen in business are all those evolutionary stimuluses that we tend to talk about it that way. Talking about your problems all the time gets kind of old. If you can put new words on it, it makes it a little easier sometimes. So that would be if you can get to the point where you declare that, and you have that amongst the people you work with, even one other person, then it tends to elevate the whole experience, because you're deliberately looking at this as life is trying to teach me a lesson. What is it? How do I grow through this instead of just get through it? So that's a big one. That may not be the first one, but another aspect of a high consciousness business would be to intend to align with divinity and have some type of active practice to do so. We'll talk about a few of our practices later. That would be another one. And a high consciousness business, they may not start this way, but eventually they should be successful. They should be a healthy and safe work environment. You can pay good wages and benefits, and you're making a good living, providing a beneficial service or product to the world. That's eventually. We didn't start that way. It was successful in some ways. It was safe, but as we've succeeded. I guess this is the part of the last one is to, or at least the one we're going to talk about. There's a lot of conversations here. I mean, this is just the beginning of a whole series, right? So, if the business has a service attitude, and the owners or the senior people have an attitude of serving their employees, that they're in service to their employees, they're in service. Everybody seems, or everybody sees themselves as being in service to the customers. I mean, we sometimes we joke that this business would be a lot easier without all these customers asking for us to get things done. We get a lot more projects finished. But it's just kind of a joke to remind us that we're really there to serve. And, we're in service to our suppliers, to the earth. If the employees consider themselves in service to the business owners, and the business owners consider themselves in service to the employees, then you have that goodwill that creates a high consciousness business. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting on the alignment with divinity and an active practice, which we'll get into. But I also seen some businesses that I've been involved with where they're in alignment. Maybe they don't overtly call it divinity, but they're in alignment to a higher cause of some sort, like a higher purpose. We'll talk about some businesses, but they may be in alignment to taking care of the earth.
Yes.
There's no pollution. There's an ethic to recycle, to really actively have a better footprint on the earth. A lighter, more green footprint on the earth. So that could be in alignment with divinity in the way the people involved see that. It's a higher purpose that they're serving. I like that service orientation. We've talked about it in the past. There were some books on servant leadership, where as a leader in a business, you're really being like you said, a servant to large circles. Customers, employees, suppliers, the city, the state, the country, the world. That the circle of service is big. So that's something that's been around in some management circles for a while, and it really resonates for me, that the service part of it. And I love talking to FLFE customers and hearing their stories of transformation and how it's been good for them, and how we're serving them, to hear that directly from them. It's really great in our webinars when we do that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the themes in our business is we intend to do what's in the highest and best interest of all creation. So that's how we express it. But, we've been at this for a long time. I've been having conversations like this since 1995. So that's, 26 years. So you get refined statements that encapsulate that whole theme. And, that's a journey in its own. You have to find something that's real for you. If you don't feel like, highest and best interest of all is something you can relate to, you got to find something that has meaning for you. I mean, when I visited your company, I've never seen a business that had employees around for so long. So whatever you're doing to have that length of tenure in your companies is, I would say, you're being in service to them, but you might not think about it in those terms. I think for you, it was culture is what I was recalling for you.
Yeah, and part of the culture is mutual care, which is really service.
Yeah.
Yeah. So companies like Patagonia. So Patagonia is a relatively high consciousness company. We've tested them in the past, and they're really focused on the environment there.
Yes.
So that's the recycling of materials and using less resources to produce the clothing, and cycling things back when you're finished with the Patagonia piece back to them, and I think they have some donation to green causes as part of their business model too. So that's an example of a company that fits that. Maybe they're not saying divinity if you go to their website, but they're really focused on a higher purpose of of the health of the planet.
Yeah, and they recently said they were not going to advertise on a certain company's platform because they believed that company was telling mistruths.
Mm.
So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So taking a stance in the world
Mm-hmm.
for the truth. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's certainly another way to increase the level of consciousness of a business is, have that orientation around truth as best you can determine it.
Mm-hmm.
Tesla's another great one. Most people know about Tesla and what they've done to accelerate the world's transition into sustainable energy. I think that's their statement is huge. I mean, so many car companies now and coming out with electric cars and electric trucks, and they're all trying to catch up with Tesla because Tesla made electric cars not the stodgy, slow, bricks, but fun sports cars that are really fun to drive. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a breakthrough. Nobody was doing that, and they've really accelerated that movement to electric. I think there's at least 3 electric trucks coming out next year, maybe more, that could really revolutionize the pickup truck market. So
Yeah. Yeah, being the gearheads that we are, we end up talking a lot about that. Of course, you have a Tesla, and
mhm,
yeah, I think my next vehicle is going to be electric. I know that
mhm,
I
mhm,
drive a Wrangler and or Rubicon, and yeah, they've just come out with an electric hybrid. So
mhm,
when mine retires, I know that's what I'll get, and I'd like to
mhm,
get an electric truck as well. I'm just looking at the Cybertruck. It's going to be 3 or 4 years probably before I could get one. But
mhm,
there's
mhm.
the Rivians. I just found out the Rivians actually tow 12,000 pounds. I think, Jeff. One of the models, or
Yeah.
it's 10 or 12. I'll have to check. It's like, oh, well, okay, that
Mhm.
might be, yeah,
Yeah. So Tesla's service in the world is having these conversations going.
yeah,
4 or 5 years ago, you just have your traditional pickup truck choices.
mm-hmm.
So they're an example of a high conscious business really focused on that. Tom, there's some shoe companies. There's Tom Shoes and Zappos were 2 companies that were kind of on our radar for high consciousness. And Zappos was really around customer service and the culture in the
Mm-hmm.
business. And that was some time ago, the last time we checked that one. But they really have an ethos around a fun workplace with career opportunities. So that was an example of really the practices of care inside the business. And I don't know where that's gone, but since we last tested, and then I think Tom's Shoes were giving away a pair of shoes for each pair of shoes you would buy. Um, and that's similar in FLFE. From the beginning, we give away a free subscription for everyone that gets
Mm-hmm.
purchased, what we call pay it forward. So those are examples of ways of serving the world and ways of being successful as well. I mean, people appreciate that if they purchase something, that the part of that money goes to serving the world in some way.
Yeah, there's a big movement out there. 1% for the planet. There's all kinds of things that we can get involved in, and and it may not be for the first 4 or 5 years you're in business. You may need to get yourself established before you can explore how you want to give back. It doesn't always mean you start out that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's about checking in what's in the highest and best all the time. Sometimes what's in the highest and best is to focus on having a profitable business that pays well before you give much, because the employees, they're important. Everybody needs to make a living,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm. So this shift, in your business or work life or home life, and this, all of this can apply to if your primary work right now is taking care of children, raising children, maybe educating them at home, or whatever work you're doing in your workplace, is this transition to a more, and first we talked about this awareness of this being a place for you to work and transform yourself. Um, and really, it does all start with each of us, with ourselves. And for me, it came with work-life balance, really looking at, okay, if this is all my spiritual practice, am I in balance? Am I working too many hours? Because I really was, when we started FLFE, I was working a lot of hours
Oh, yeah.
there, and it's come into balance now, which has really made a difference in my life. And the mood conversation has been big in all my businesses, where in these more traditional manufacturing business, it was just helping people to realize that they have moods. People tended before we did that education to just see the world through whatever glasses they're wearing at the moment. It might be an angry pair of glasses, right? So then everything looks like it's aggravating. Everything's against you. And so if you don't realize you're in a mood, then it's really hard to change the situation. So part of it's like, okay, I'm feeling off, I'm feeling angry, take a walk, listen to some music, change what you're doing, so we did a whole campaign around, mood. And it was using a building. So are you in the basement? So if you're in the basement, it's kind of dark, you can't see very far, it's kind of stuffy. Versus if you're in a penthouse, you're up, maybe you're on the roof and it's green and there's plants up there, and you can see the whole horizon, you can see the big picture. And so that big picture is a whole different mood than being in the basement. So we have a poster with the building and the basement and the penthouse, so that those kind of things personally really can help shift the way we are in work and ourselves.
So anytime you're making a transition, the first thing you want to concentrate on is yourself, and not other people, not the environment, not the world. You want to focus on you and take it back to where you have the most control. Where you have the most control is over yourself, hopefully. I mean, some of us are out of control for parts of our life, but we certainly have more possibility of control over ourselves than anybody else. And managing your state is a big part of managing yourself. And I think that's what I'm hearing, Jeff, from you is, you've done in my experience of your other companies, is that you've done a very good job of helping people manage their state, and you call it mood. And but it's just good to remember to put the focus back on ourselves if we want something to change or we're doing a transition. And part of that would be to understand your values a little bit better. And I come from a coaching background, and I've been trained in 3 different schools, and different schools of thinking and coaching have different ways of looking at values, but there's lots of information around values, lots of books out there. There's lots of processes to go through. And if you're doing a big transition in your life and it's rougher than you want it to be, then you may want to take a look at your values and reevaluate what's important to you. I mean, you just talked, Jeff, about, we used to work all the time when we started FLFE. It was like, you have 2 other businesses too. And I had another business I was running because we weren't, getting a paycheck from FLFE. But it was a lot of fun. I don't know if I would have had it any other way. It was a lot of joy in that. And, it's been 8 years now, and it's time to focus on something else. And it's pretty easy to keep going with the momentum you've had. And people around you sometimes they expect you just to keep going the way you've been going, because that's what a lot of us do. So the values, and how they express in terms of behavior is pretty core to being a happy, uh, positive, abundant person. And happy, positive, and abundant, most of the time is, I guess that's, well, speak for myself, that's my idea of what a spiritual life would be like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the positive is about having a lot of energy, right, to get stuff done, but you can take
Mm-hmm.
action when you need to.
And part of that culture of service too is the work environment and having generosity.
Hmm.
We're kind of talking maybe in a manager position or a business owner position is like just ending up on the side of generosity. Because it's kind of easy to get into that business mode where, oh yeah, these are the rules. These are the laws that we have to follow. But really going beyond those and beyond, to be generous with people and
Mm-hmm.
with leave, with, how they're getting, how the pay is and bonuses and, whatever ways you can show love and appreciation for everyone, and have fun. It's a big part of, the love and appreciation is great. Just going around and talking to people and like, wow, that's really cool what you're doing right now, um, and that fairness and that generosity just becomes like, wow, that didn't have to happen, but that really helped me spend more time with my kids, or to have more flexibility, whatever it is. Um, and that maybe that's part of the values that have come out for me,
Mm-hmm.
um, is that appreciation for others. Um,
Yeah, the way it shows up in at least in the Nelson office is that Ashutosh, the general manager, and myself, and you're included in that conversation, is that we're proactive about trying to help the employees have the best life they can.
mm-hmm,
It's like if you know that there's a child that's sick, and it would really help them to work from home for a little bit longer or to adjust their life in some way, as long as their work's getting done, because we need to keep the business moving to provide for everybody. Um, then you go talk to them. It's like, well, it seems like this is going on. How can we help you with that? Would it help if you work different hours for a while,
mm-hmm,
or you worked less hours? Or if somebody, we have a couple of people saving for down payments on a home and they're looking to work overtime. So if you have it in the budget and there's projects that you want to move along, it's like you go out of your way to remind them that, yeah, there's these projects that need to get done. If you want to work some overtime, then it's time and a half, and that'll go towards your house down payment
mm-hmm,
or paying
mm-hmm,
off a bill or saving for something. So it's just that proactive approach to how do I serve the employees to help them have the
mm-hmm,
best life that they can.
mm-hmm. And the having fun part seems to be a piece of this too. Had some great parties at FLFE.
Yeah.
Um, I just had a Halloween party. I got a little video from the team, and everyone was watching, I guess, Ghostbusters afterwards. But yeah, that just having some fun,
Mm-hmm.
finding ways to just get out of work mode and just have fun together seems part of that shift to a higher consciousness business.
Yeah, there's something that happens when everybody's focused on raising their consciousness, even if they don't use it that way. And business is just part of that. And then the business isn't the center of your life, it's divinity. And
Mm.
that just changes the whole
Mm-hmm.
thing where, yeah, let's enjoy the journey like as much as we can. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to be this grind where we show up every day and just
Mm-hmm.
and struggle through as many things on our list as we can get done. It's a pretty different attitude.
Yeah,
Yeah,
stop and celebrate.
yeah. So we've got classic service work to the community as shifting into a high consciousness business. Donations where you can make them. Um, Having really good finances, like being really well organized. I mean, our
Mm.
our accountant is, and the monthly summary that they do is, I mean, it just takes all the vagueness out of where we are financially.
Mm-hmm.
And doesn't mean there was always much money there, but at least we weren't vague, and we were,
Mm-hmm.
then we can make adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never seen, well, I haven't been part of a lot of large companies. Most of them have been smallish, and not that we're really big, but you know, when you get 30 or 40 people in a company, then it does, each level has its own sort of structure it needs. But I
Mm-hmm.
just really appreciate not being vague around, where the money is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, being vague with money is one of those things where it's usually kind of hiding something that's not working well,
Mm-hmm.
or that's like you don't want to face. So just having it all up front and really clear financially. And so it's interesting. You wouldn't think, okay, how would finances contribute to spiritual progress or having a high consciousness company? But it's like the more it's on, everything is up front and right there in front of you, and you know what the situation is, then you can work with it in a way. I think some businesses cut corners a little bit on the accountants and financing that you're doing. And it just, my experience has been that's really not, it's really a great place to have somebody that's really, really good at that. Somebody that's high consciousness in that
Mm-hmm.
area of finance. Like we've talked in the past podcasts about being around somebody that's really high in a certain area of their life. Like finance, that being around them, it brings us up, so we're
Yes.
in the field of of high consciousness finance, or accounting money, and then we come up with that, and we rise in consciousness in that area.
Yeah, it's nice to be around someone who doesn't have a lot of the drama, around it. They just do the job, and the money gets distributed in a way that, isn't the theme of everything else, which is in service. And
Mhm.
money can have that energy on it. It's just most of us aren't at peace with it.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Mhm.
we've had a very high consciousness accountant from the beginning of the business.
Mhm.
It's been great.
Mhm. So I've always had the orientation around competitors, that we're just all in this together,
Mm-hmm.
that there's plenty to go around. It's sort of an abundance viewpoint that comes naturally to me. It's always had really good relationships with all my, so-called competitors, other people in the same field. And it's really, you can learn from each other, and there's really the celebration of success for somebody else, even if they got the big job that you didn't get. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
congratulations, good job. Um, there's, that compassion or empathy with everybody that's in our circle, and it includes companies that we're competing with, and in the traditional term, of competition.
Yeah, that's certainly. We're going to talk about business analysis in a little bit, but that's not an easy one to be in. I mean, that's one where, need to remind each other a lot that we're, like in our particular genre, it's trying to help raise the consciousness of the planet in one sense. And yeah, we have to have a business model. Well, we've chosen to have a business because that's the best way to spread the work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have a
Mm-hmm.
business, then you could form a nonprofit. You could look for, if you have a lot of personal wealth, you can just spend it on that. You can look for angel investors or people that just want to give money, and there's not as high a possibility, at least from our perspective, up till now, of progressing in the business the way we want to, and to continue to grow it and
Mm-hmm.
continue to serve, if we're waiting for other people to support us financially. But if we start a
Mm-hmm.
business, and you have more control over how you serve and grow, then business is just the best way to be in the world in that regard. I mean, it's probably worth talking about um,
Mm-hmm.
that we consciously just chose to do a business as a result of praying about what to do with this technology we discovered, and how we were using it to help
Mm-hmm.
raise the consciousness of the planet. Just in the 2011 transition to 2012,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't that we wanted to go out and start another business.
Mm-hmm.
It came out of the result of doing service work and asking, divinity, what's your will for us?
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed it once I was into it, but I didn't want to really have to start another business. It wasn't, and we had the choice, but that's what wanted to
Mm-hmm.
happen. So we're talking about business as a spiritual the practice here in a few minutes, and business as a spiritual path and what the differences are. And there's another piece to that model. It's good to say that sometimes business is the best way to express um, your goodwill towards humanity. It's just the best model to do it with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the only piece that's sort of on my mind, just to talk about at the end here, is shadow work.
Mm.
It's another thing that we do occasionally in FLFE. I certainly do it with individual employees. We had a lady start a little while ago who is immigrating to Canada, and for a person in that process, it's very difficult for them to switch companies
Mm.
because just the way that the regulatory environment works in Canada. And so, if you're an employer and you know that it's very difficult for someone to switch companies, then you can, if you're not aware of your own shadow, you can want to take advantage of that. You can want to pay them less, or
Mm.
ask them to work more, give them or overload them responsibilities because it's hard for them to go anywhere. So I
Mm.
had a conversation with the new employee about that, and there was some shadow stuff on their end that they could see in the company because we're relatively generous, and there's ways to take advantage of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so just looking at what is the shadow piece on both sides of the coin
Mm-hmm.
for yourself and the employee, or we're in a position as owners to be able to have those conversations. If you're an employee, you might not be able to have that with your superior, or the owner, or the business owner, your manager, however it works in your environment. But you can have it with yourself. It's part of watching your ego.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you're at peace with your ego, which wants to dominate, control, and make everything subservient to it, when you're at peace with that, or so let's say the more at peace you are with your ego, then the more understanding of what you'll have for other people's ego and what tends to want to happen through them, because we all get lost
Mm-hmm.
in the mind's tendency to want to control everything and dominate it and
Mm-hmm.
make it the king of the castle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that shadow work for me too is the unconscious things that I maybe haven't thought of, or they're in the background, like you said, sort of part of the ego and fighting for survival. It's like the competitor piece.
Mm-hmm.
The shadow there is there's not enough to go around, and I'm losing, to the competitor, and maybe they're cheating or immoral, or there's some jealousy of their success. They didn't come by it, uh, in a positive way. But for me, it really was around abundance, and that there is enough. And so that not enough, or that I'm not enough shadow piece, is kind of in the background. And that can be part of a lot of situations. If your job at the moment is at home taking care of kids, there's that worthiness shadow piece there that can be part of that unconscious orientation there. So something that it's something to think about, is that shadow work or unconscious beliefs that are there, sort of running the show in some ways sometimes.
Yeah, and oftentimes 90% of it is unconscious, and it just shows up when we behave in a certain way, which sometimes will surprise even us. It's like we have this
Mm,
reaction that's like, the response should be a 2 out of 10 or 3 out of 10, and it's like an 8 or a 9.
mm,
And it's just that's unconscious shadow.
mhm,
Typically, it's
mm,
like, wow, I didn't know I had that much of a charge on that thing. But
mm,
based upon the experience I'm at least having on the inside, even if I'm not
mm,
showing it, it's good to have a poker face sometimes.
mhm,
There's definitely more going on than just that
mhm,
behavior or
mhm,
activity.
mhm,
So we should probably get into this business model. So working for all those years with people who were oriented towards including or making the same or having no separation between business and spirituality, or spirituality in any part of their life. Really, we typically started with business because I was working with business people, as I said, but this applies to anything. And so a model evolved out of it. And the first step of the model was was having. We'll talk about business. So business as a spiritual practice.
mhm, mhm,
So business as a spiritual practice is taking one behavior that you will do in your business that you typically struggle with. And so if you're going to switch your orientation to seeing spirituality in all parts of your life, and if we're talking about business, it's a big commitment.
mhm,
And to have one thing where you can depend upon yourself, like showing up on time for work or
mhm,
being prepared for meetings, um, or doing a prayer at the beginning of a meeting, either by yourself or
mhm,
with other people. It's just
mhm,
one behavior where you can really exercise the will that you have. And what that does is it creates discipline, and it
mhm,
reminds you you're on that path, and you learn to trust yourself more
mhm, mhm,
because you're behaving in a certain way that is in alignment with your choice. And that builds a momentum. And once you've established some part of your business life or this new spiritual inclusion that you have in whatever it is, you mentioned, um, raising children, Jeff.
mhm,
It could be anything. It could be exercise. Could be whatever. Just that most of us work. Well, many of us work a large part of our lives, and if we don't include business in the one of the largest parts of our life, it's a pretty big gap. So it's
mhm,
finding a way to measure the commitment that you make and how you're able to keep it. And
mhm,
that's where you get that momentum, that self-esteem. And
mhm.
then you can take it to the next step. So,
So it's a practice picking some things, especially where we struggle, like
mhm,
being on time to meetings. So
right.
I would keep track how many meetings I had, how many times I was on time,
Yeah.
and really just look at it. Parenting, it could be losing my temper.
Mhm.
How many times did I lose my temper last week and the week before? And where am I? Then picking that as a place where I can evolve and transcend and just keeping track of it.
Yeah, I used to
Yeah.
carry a little spiral notepad around at one point, and I would track different behaviors that I was doing a lot that I wanted to change. And, when you're looking at the end of the week and you've done something 300 times, I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
could be pretty humbling.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not be a big outward behavior, but if it's some subtlety in your thinking, like thinking
Mm-hmm.
there's not enough, or you're thinking that you don't have enough time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every time you're aware of
Mm-hmm.
that thought, you write it down, and then it's
Mm-hmm.
like, wow. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it could just be one thing at a time that
one
you're
thing,
working on.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what's the next step?
Well, business as a spiritual path. So the distinction between business as a spiritual practice and business as a spiritual path is where you see all of your business life as your spiritual life. It's when your
Mm-hmm.
business life becomes your monastery, it becomes your
Mm-hmm.
church, it becomes your a religion, maybe not the religion for you,
Mm-hmm.
but it's where you're all in. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
everything about this thing I call business, or perhaps, if you're looking at parenting, um, this thing that I'm doing for this large part of my day, or even for a small part of my day, it's all about my spiritual growth. There is
Mm.
no,
Mm.
there's nothing, there's no separation at all. It's not just one behavior.
Mm-hmm.
It's everything.
So it's partly how the business is run, things we talked about before to make a high consciousness business, but really bringing in those intentions, like we do in our FLFE meetings. We meet every morning and we do an invocation that sort of connects us to divinity and to the greater picture, and it's kind of a surrender. Great way to start the day in that little meditation together. It seems to be a lot of power in that.
Yeah, that's one thing we do pretty well is we do a prayer at the beginning of 95% of the meetings, and that just changes the energy in the whole meeting. When we don't do it, I notice it now because it's so rare. It's like, wow, something doesn't seem to be flowing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's finding a way to pray in a way that is empowering to the person who's doing it. Different people can pray, and people can pass, right? They don't have to pray, but somebody does. They do it in their own way, and that's respected.
Mm-hmm. And one way we look at that is activating a field together.
Yes.
Creating a container that's part of that meeting that is a field of consciousness that really gets opened by that invocation or that prayer.
Yeah, having some values in the business. I would say one of our values is to do what we consider is in the highest and best interest of all creation. Some core principles we operate from.
Mm-hmm.
That's just part of the conversation that people come into, even in the interview process. It's a pretty strange thing to say, except for the people who wanted to work at a place all their life where that's just part of everyday conversation. They just delight in it. And it's, it's like the more successful we are, it feels like the more we can afford to be transparent about, how we really run the business, and that we pray a lot, and ask for guidance. And it's pretty evident to us anyway that we get ideas and insights that are outside of our educational and experiential expertise, that we should not know that. And we get these answers to questions, and we put them into practice, and they work. And it's like, wow, that's magic.
Yeah, and it's back to previous podcasts about whose thought is this?
Yeah.
That particularly after we've initiated a meeting with invocation or prayer, and we're in a higher field, we're in a higher consciousness field, and then in those situations, asking those questions or pondering some situation, those answers seem to come, and they're not our thoughts. And then check, using kinesiology to check the level of consciousness of the thought and appropriateness for what we're doing. But that thoughts are not our thoughts are really in those high consciousness business environments. As spiritual path has helped us to create FLFE, and we couldn't have done it.
No, we couldn't have done it without it. No way. It's such a nonlinear, specialized field. I don't know that anybody creates anything that does a lot of good in the world without help from other sources. I don't know if that really happens. And lots of inventors talking about they're working on an invention, they have a nap on their desk or under the desk, or they're doing something to distract themselves, and the thought comes in. And where does that thought come from? That's the question. If you're in service, it's probably coming from a higher power. That's what we believe.
Yeah, and there's a situation where those thoughts come into many inventors at the same time. When something's coming into the world, it comes in multiple places. So it's just a reminder that creating this high conscious environment, these solutions come in that move things forward at a higher rate of speed than it would be if you're just using your mind and you're trying to logic your way through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a formal process that we just recently completed, and it's called Detunement. And it was based upon the work of, at least part of it was based upon the work of the Findhorn Foundation, where they would tune into the land or ask the land and the plants what it needed. And I spent a week with Dorothy McLean in a workshop, and it was a really interesting process. One of the things I remember is we were, tuning into this the energy of this flower. And it sounds pretty strange, but there was 18 people in the room. And at the end of it, what I realized is there was 18 versions of truth.
Mm.
And there's nobody's experience that was less true than anybody else's. And it expressed different through each person. Now, this was a process where we were in a pretty intense, week-long process, and we were in a very, very remote location. And, Dorothy had a pretty high level of sophistication in creating the field, if you want to use that language, Jeff, and the environment for that to come out. And so it's not something that I was familiar with to that level before. And it was interesting to be part of a circle with the co-founder, one of the founders. I guess there was Elaine, Peter, and Dorothy, one of the founders of a very successful community, intentional community. And she carried that in her because that's the way she lived for decades. So when you're in the presence of somebody who has lived something for decades and created success with it, you get to ride the wave of their mastery, I think you'd call it. Yeah.
Yeah, the attunement process in the FLFE business has been that way for me too. And it's that, what we do is tune into the business. And we believe that there's an entity, a positive consciousness entity associated with every positive business. Call it an angel, you call it whatever you like, but there's an intelligence, and it's how divinity wants to express through that business. And so we do that attunement where we get in a big circle and we activate the field through the prayer invocation, and everybody sort of meditates together and connects to, instead of the flower in that case, connects to the intelligence of the business and what wants to express over the next quarter. We've been working to do this every quarter, and it's just amazing what happens. So then afterwards we go around and everybody speaks their own truth about it. Like you said, that might be a feeling, it might be a vision, it might be a word or series of words. And then once we've done that and everybody's gone, it's just amazing the themes that come out. I recall one of those where the theme was really build a foundation for the business for FLFE so that it can grow. And so people were seeing big tree roots, and other people were seeing like big blocks of, cement or stone in the earth that were creating this foundation. And it just all kind of came like, all right, we need to get our infrastructure, really clear. So that became the quarterly focus. But it was everybody's own personal way of connecting to the intelligence of the business. So that's a practice. That's an example of business's spiritual path, where you're bringing that connection into the business and using it to move your activities forward.
Yeah, it's a very deliberate, structured process. And when we complete that, we put it on a vision board up on the wall. And that reminds us about that next phase that the business is trying to express in the world. And it's always a fun thing to do. We have all this other stuff to do in the business. And I don't know if it sounds like we don't get much work done because we're always praying and doing this stuff, but 90% of the time it's just taking care of customers and doing what needs to get done. It's, 90 or 95% perspiration and 5% inspiration. But although dealing with the customers is pretty joyful, I think for most of the customer service reps, and we pretty well have fun most of the day. It's just the days can be long and there's lots of stuff to do. But having things like attunements, at least once in a while, it allows everybody to be an equal in the circle. Whereas we're just another person checking into how divinity wants to express, and all those answers are equal and respected. And we do have to choose a theme and move forward on something, but everybody's thought is, in whatever way it comes to them, is acknowledged.
So what's the next step, Clayten? I know it's business as a spiritual service. So we've talked about spiritual practice, taking in one particular practice and where we're challenged and really work through that to transcend. And then business as a spiritual path, which could be, parenting as a spiritual path, or where you're really looking at, okay, how can I really have everything related to this be part of my spiritual path? And then what is this business as a spiritual service? How does that work?
Yeah, well, the way that I framed it in the coaching world was business as a spiritual service is when you've achieved financial freedom for yourself and maybe for other people in the business. And then you are evaluating the next step in your life. And since you're not working for money anymore, you have the options of doing lots of things. And you consciously decide, when you're that free, that the greatest contribution you can make to the world, the most joy you can have, is to stay in business and keep doing business. And you just give the profits away, or maybe you give it all to the employees, or there's lots of ways to give. I mean, of course, you can just make the service cheaper. You can do all kinds of things, but it's just being free and making a conscious choice to go back into business and serve. That would be how. That's typically the theme that came out of business as a spiritual service. And
I've seen retired people, like retired senior business people, or just even people that are retired and were experts in something, then mentor young people coming up, or volunteer in other ways where they're just giving it away. Would that fall in that category too?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just the monetary piece. It's just being of service with your gift in the world. Yeah, that's a bigger. That's definitely part of how it works, and it's not necessarily seen as business as a spiritual service if you're a senior business person and you're doing free mentoring to a younger person, or just someone who's less experienced. It could be older than you. That's definitely the theme.
Yeah, just giving it away, just being in a position where you can give away that service, and that orientation really is to, is to help. Is in being in service to the world, or to particular people, or whoever the group is.
Yeah, you don't need anything from the person. You don't need anything from any outside source, I guess, would be part of that. And that's a state that is, pretty rarefied, where you're in such a position of resourcefulness and strength, I guess, personally, that you can afford to give fully.
Yeah. So in FLFE, we give away a lot. I mean, that's part of our model from the beginning with the PIFs, but also we do a lot of service work that's sort of unrelated to the business.
Yeah. It ends up that we give away 90%. I think is
Mm-hmm.
we have for a conservative number since the beginning of
Mm-hmm.
the company,
Mm-hmm.
which was back in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're very overbuilt with our machines that create the high consciousness field, and if
Mm-hmm.
if we aren't if it isn't being sold to people, then we just give it to the